One of the most significant economic developments unfolding across North America is happening right now. Yet many people still do not fully grasp what is truly at stake. The deadline on July 1st, 2026, for the review of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, known as CUSMA and created as the successor to NAFTA, is now only weeks away. Based on statements and actions emerging from both Washington and Ottawa, the Trump administration appears highly unlikely to meet that target. The issue is not simply failing to reach an agreement. It is the growing possibility of missing the broader purpose that this review process was originally designed to achieve. The disorder surrounding the situation is well documented. To understand it properly, it is necessary to examine how events developed. CUSMA was negotiated during President Trump's first term and replaced NAFTA. After returning to office, Trump repeatedly described the agreement as no longer relevant and suggested publicly that it may have reached the end of its usefulness. That perspective reveals an important reality. This is not an administration approaching a trade review as a technical exercise aimed at improving efficiency. Instead, it is an administration willing to challenge an agreement that was originally crafted under its own leadership. That attitude has shaped everything that has followed over recent months. July 1st, 2026, has become a critical date for the future of CUSMA. Yet substantial uncertainty remains regarding what exactly is expected to occur on that day. Some observers believe it represents the final deadline for negotiations needed to preserve the agreement. Others see it as merely the beginning of a much larger renegotiation process. The confusion exists because the administration has maintained significant ambiguity throughout the review period. Structurally, each participating country faces three options in July. They may extend the agreement for another 16 years. They may withdraw entirely, or they may choose neither renewal nor withdrawal, triggering a yearly review process that could continue negotiations for as long as a decade. As a result, the situation is not simply a choice between preserving the agreement or ending it. A third path exists. That option would prolong uncertainty for businesses and supply chains, potentially for years, while providing the Trump administration with substantial leverage and requiring little immediate commitment. Increasingly, that outcome appears to be the most likely direction. United States Trade Representative Jameson Greer has stated that he does not expect CUSMA negotiations to be completed by July 1st. The Trump administration formally opened negotiations with Mexico last month. However, official discussions between Canada and the United States had still not begun. As of early June 2026, the United States and Mexico were engaged in formal talks. Canada was not yet participating in comparable negotiations. With the July 1st review approaching, both the United States and Mexico have reported progress in their bilateral discussions. Canada, meanwhile, remains outside any formal negotiating process. This has not been due to a lack of effort from Ottawa. Canadian officials have repeatedly indicated their willingness to move forward. Canada delivered a formal letter requesting renewal of the agreement. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc wrote that Canada recognizes the possibility that both partner countries may seek improvements that would strengthen North American competitiveness. He also stated that discussions with the United States regarding sector-specific tariffs would be essential. Yet correspondence alone does not initiate formal negotiations. The American side has continued moving cautiously, particularly regarding Canada. The reason is straightforward. Jameson Greer has not extended an invitation for Canada to enter formal negotiations. This was not an administrative oversight. It was not a scheduling issue. It represented a deliberate strategic position. Greer stated that although the administration hopes to resolve trade disputes quickly, approval of the agreement before the July target appears unlikely. According to Greer, the central issue on July 1st is determining what course the United States intends to take. The choice is whether to approve renewal without major changes or conclude that the current arrangement is inadequate. The significance of that statement is considerable. It indicates that Washington has little interest in automatically extending the agreement. From the administration's viewpoint, the review process serves as a source of leverage. Maintaining uncertainty for Canada and for businesses creates pressure that may produce concessions without requiring firm commitments from the United States. At the same time, the Trump administration continues raising a number of complaints involving Canada. Among those concerns are decisions by provinces that removed American alcohol products from store shelves as part of the Buy Canadian movement responding to United States tariffs. Actions taken in British Columbia and other provinces became a source of frustration within broader trade discussions. Dominic LeBlanc said he raised concerns regarding separate Trump administration tariffs affecting several Canadian industries during private discussions with Greer. These sectors included steel, aluminum, automobiles, lumber, and cabinetry. Each of these industries carries major economic significance. The automotive sector alone supports hundreds of thousands of jobs throughout Ontario. Steel and aluminum influence industries ranging from construction to defense manufacturing. Lumber remains closely tied to housing costs throughout North America. These are not minor subjects under negotiation. They represent core components of the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. The tariff environment adds further pressure. Canada continues facing a blanket 25% tariff on certain imports. There's also a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum imports, along with a 25% tariff on automobiles and automotive parts. As Canada seeks renewal of a free trade agreement designed to remove most trade barriers, it is simultaneously operating under substantial tariff pressure created by those same measures. That contradiction sits at the center of the entire situation. Canada's response has drawn attention and sparked debate, including within Canada itself. A growing number of observers believe that rising inflation combined with approaching midterm elections could make it increasingly difficult for President Trump to maintain the current environment of widespread tariffs and trade disruption. At the same time, Canada has shown more economic resilience than many expected. The country is also pursuing policies that could eventually reduce its dependence on the United States. Because of that, there is a belief that Canada can afford to wait longer in search of a more favorable outcome. That is largely the position taken by the Carney government. The message is simple. Do not rush. Do not accept an unfavorable agreement because of pressure. Endure the uncertainty and wait for better conditions. Canada's chief trade negotiator, Janice Choret, stated that the July 1st review date for the North American trade agreement should not be treated as a final cutoff point. She explained that some trade matters will remain unresolved by that date. She described the moment as a checkpoint rather than a cliff. The purpose of that message is to calm markets and reassure businesses that the absence of an agreement on July 2nd would not automatically trigger disaster. From a technical standpoint, that assessment is correct. CUSMA does not vanish overnight. However, the political impact and the psychological effect of failing to meet the date remain significant. Dominic LeBlanc told reporters that he remains hopeful about the work that can be accomplished with the Americans. He also noted that July 1st is the moment when Canada's trading partners will indicate their position regarding renewal of CUSMA, adding that a great deal of work remains before that date arrives. The phrase, "a lot of work to do," carries particular weight, given that formal negotiations have not yet begun. Prime Minister Mark Carney explained that the United States is conducting separate trade discussions with Canada and Mexico as the review deadline approaches. According to Carney, American negotiators have concerns involving both countries and intend to address them independently. He stated that there are technical issues involving Mexico and separate technical issues involving Canada, which is why discussions have been divided. Separating Canada from Mexico creates a familiar negotiating dynamic. If Washington secures an agreement with Mexico first, pressure could increase on Canada to accept similar terms or potentially less favorable ones to avoid standing alone. Canadian officials understand this approach clearly. Ottawa and Mexico City continue supporting a trilateral agreement and have conducted their own bilateral discussions. Yet formal CUSMA negotiations between Canada and the United States still have not begun. Meanwhile, talks involving the United States and Mexico are already underway. Negotiations between Ottawa and Washington were suspended last October after President Trump objected to an advertisement funded by Ontario that quoted former United States President Ronald Reagan criticizing tariffs. The detail is striking. Trade discussions involving two of the world's largest commercial partners were halted because of a provincial advertisement that referenced Ronald Reagan. That episode illustrates how unpredictable and personality-driven the entire process has become. Another major question concerns what happens if July 1st arrives without a resolution. Speaking at an event hosted by the Hudson Institute, Jameson Greer said the United States may need to begin steps toward leaving the North American Trade Agreement in order to continue negotiations. Under the CUSMA sunset provisions, a complete withdrawal would require 10 years. That figure receives relatively little attention, yet it is one of the most important details in the entire debate. Even if President Trump wanted to dismantle CUSMA completely, the agreement contains a built-in safeguard. The withdrawal process stretches across 10 years. Because of that structure, the most likely result is not an immediate separation. Instead, it points toward extended uncertainty, yearly reviews, continuing negotiations, and ongoing leverage for whichever administration occupies the White House. Even Jameson Greer, serving as Trump's United States trade representative, acknowledged that there is insufficient time before the American midterm elections in November to complete negotiations resulting from the CUSMA review. That statement amounts to an acknowledgement from within the administration that this issue will continue into next year at the very least. The approaching midterms alter the political equation. Tariffs that contribute to inflation become increasingly risky as an election nears. Members of Trump's own trade team also recognize that Canada may be less alarmed than some other trading partners regarding both the August 1st tariff deadline and the July 1st CUSMA review. The reason is straightforward. Only a limited share of Canadian exports entering the United States would be affected by Trump's proposed tariff increases. Most products continue entering the American market without tariffs because they remain protected under CUSMA. That may be Canada's most overlooked advantage in the entire dispute. The agreement is currently shielding the majority of Canadian trade. That reality explains why Canada strongly supports renewal. It also explains why abandoning the agreement would create economic damage not only for Canada, but also for American consumers, manufacturers, and farmers who depend on integrated North American supply networks. Canada's economy remains deeply connected to that of the United States and relies heavily on a trading environment with minimal barriers. As one economist explained, Canada has attempted to negotiate firmly without yielding to every demand, while also recognizing that its bargaining position has limits. The result has been a careful balancing act. Beyond the technical details of trade policy, there is also a human dimension. Observers continue monitoring the negotiations closely to determine whether the gap between the two countries has expanded to a point where it could bring a dramatic conclusion to decades of largely unrestricted trade. One economist raised a simple question. If you owned a business and knew Trump would remain in office for only 3 or 4 years, would you immediately make major changes to your supply chain, or would you simply wait? That hesitation is already visible throughout corporate boardrooms in Canada. Businesses are postponing major long-term investments. Factories are delaying expansion plans. Supply chain adjustments that might otherwise be taking place remain on hold because no one knows what the rules will look like in 6 months. United States Ambassador to Canada Pete Huxra stated that it appears increasingly clear, at least for now, that Canada and the United States will not reach a broader agreement. American officials had hoped a broader agreement could be negotiated. HRA acknowledged that possibility, and the statement carried weight because it suggested movement away from the most ambitious objectives. Washington had sought a far-reaching renegotiation that could reshape the entire North American economic framework in a way that favored the United States. Now, even the American ambassador was indicating that outcome was unlikely. British Columbia's jobs minister noted that CUSMA will not expire for another decade and suggested that delaying negotiations could make sense. According to him, waiting until after the midterm elections may serve the interests of the United States. It may also benefit Canada. At the same time, he emphasized that securing an agreement now, while preserving the fundamental principles already in place, would be a positive outcome. Such a result would provide the certainty that businesses and investors are seeking. He also admitted that in the current environment, a short-term resolution may not be realistic. That may be the most candid assessment offered by any official involved in this process. Under present conditions, certainty may simply be unattainable, regardless of the quality of negotiations or the reasonableness of any position placed on the table. So where does the situation stand as July 1st approaches? Canada still has not received an invitation to formal negotiations. The United States Trade Representative has already stated publicly that the deadline will not be achieved. Meanwhile, the 3 possible paths remain unchanged. Renewal, withdrawal, or an open-ended annual review process that could continue for years. Tariffs affecting steel, aluminum, lumber, automobiles, and many other products remain active. Businesses throughout both countries remain hesitant. President Trump has repeatedly demonstrated that he views trade arrangements as instruments of leverage rather than traditional partnerships. The CUSMA review was originally intended to serve as a moment of North American coordination. It was designed as an opportunity to evaluate whether the agreement established during Trump's first term continued serving all 3 member countries effectively. Instead, the review has evolved into another arena in a broader economic conflict. Deadlines have lost importance. Partnerships have come under strain. Canada, America's largest trading partner and closest ally, is increasingly being treated as another country from which concessions can be extracted. July 1st will arrive. Negotiations are expected to continue afterward. The uncertainty is likely to remain through the midterm elections and could potentially extend through the remainder of this presidential term. The unresolved issue is how much economic damage occurs before a final outcome emerges. What makes this moment particularly important extends beyond political messaging and public appearances. The July 2026 review represents the decision point that will determine whether the agreement remains secured until 2042, moves into annual review status, or enters a complete renegotiation process. Those possibilities represent 3 very different futures for the North American economy. A 16-year extension would provide the stability businesses need to invest, hire workers, and expand operations. Annual reviews would create a permanent mechanism, allowing President Trump and future presidents to seek additional concessions year after year. A full renegotiation would open a process with consequences that no participant, including the United States, could fully predict or control. Signals emerging from the White House throughout the past year and a half suggest that the Trump administration is not interested in a simple extension. Instead, officials are pursuing major revisions, including changes involving automotive exports and access to Canada's dairy sector. One proposal from the administration would require a minimum percentage of automobile content to be manufactured in the United States. That single requirement could reshape the entire North American automotive industry. The sector supports hundreds of thousands of workers across Michigan, Ohio, Ontario, and Quebec. There's also no guarantee such a restructuring would ultimately benefit the United States. Integrated supply chains cannot be redirected instantly. When forced to move too quickly, they often break. According to CBC News, the primary danger is not an immediate collapse. CUSMA does not automatically terminate in July 2026 if negotiations fail. President Trump could begin withdrawal with 6 months' notice. However, such a move would also create substantial disruption inside the United States. That reality limits how aggressively the administration can use that option. Now, this is the aspect often overlooked by the most alarming coverage. President Trump possesses leverage, but that leverage is not unlimited. Destroying CUSMA would not affect only Canada. American farmers selling products into Canada would be impacted. American manufacturers relying on Canadian components would face consequences. American consumers could experience higher prices almost immediately. Expectations are increasing that negotiations will continue beyond July 1st as both countries attempt to resolve outstanding disputes involving trade and tariffs. A former special advisor to a Canadian Prime Minister recently stated on BNN Bloomberg that the current situation should not be viewed as preventing a renewed CUSMA involving all three countries. She pointed out that Canada and Mexico operate under very different labor conditions, workforce structures, and industrial strengths. As a result, the challenges are genuinely complicated and cannot be resolved according to any preferred political schedule. BNN Bloomberg also reported comments from Canada's chief trade negotiator Janice Shorett. She emphasized that Canada is not waiting for a formal process before doing the necessary work. According to Shorett, Canadian officials are already addressing outstanding issues. When American and Mexican negotiators reach the stage where they can fully engage with Canada, Ottawa intends to be ready. That approach is deliberate. Remain patient. Remain prepared. Remain publicly calm. Whether that strategy succeeds depends largely on developments beyond Canada's control. Most importantly, it depends on whether President Trump concludes that applying pressure on Canada provides greater political value than restoring stability to the North American economy. Global News highlighted that reality clearly. What is known with certainty is simple. July 1st is only 3 weeks away. Formal negotiations between the United States and Canada have not started. American officials have indicated they want changes rather than automatic approval. And the future of supply chains, employment, investment decisions, and economic planning across an entire continent remains uncertain. Whether this moment becomes a routine checkpoint or a dramatic turning point may ultimately depend less on negotiators and policy documents than on the decision of a single individual in Washington on a single morning. More than any tariff figure or legal provision, that is the element drawing the attention of everyone following this story. If you found this analysis valuable, share your thoughts and continue following the developments surrounding CUSMA, North American trade, and the economic decisions that will shape the years ahead. Please leave your thoughts about this content in the comments below. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.